Good evening. I'm just checking that I'm actually going live on Instagram as well as on Facebook. I think I now am about to be live on Instagram too. So, thank you for joining me this evening on my volcanic literature session, which I'm going to start with some pyrotechnics to get you into the mood for volcanoes. I tried this earlier and it did seem to work, so let's hope that it works again. I'm putting on my very special volcanic hat, which I'm going to now light if I can. Oh dear, that's actually gone off. So I might be able to. Oh no, I'm being completely useless with my match now. Oh, I think I'm gonna have to start again with a new match. So it's lovely to have you joining me. I'm going to just light this very exciting pyrotechnical affair and hope that you're able to see me. If you're on Facebook, do let me know if you're with me this evening for the eruption that is volcanic literature. Hello, Colleen. Can you see me on Facebook? I'm hoping that all the technology is working, that it's not being combusted by the madness of my crazy fire. I can't see myself on the picture, so I hope that it's working. I will explain all in a minute, but we do have a great joy in fires, and I wondered whether you might enjoy a bit of pyrotechnical madness. Oh, there we are, we're back. And thank you so much for coming this evening for this very special volcanic literary event. It's going to be full of myths, adventures, stories, and great literature. And thanks, Colleen. I'm glad that that could be seen. Um, we all love playing with fire, don't we? And that's one of the reasons that we love volcanoes in literature. But they also have a lot of symbolic meanings, which I'm going to start the evening by delving into a little bit before we talk about specific stories and books. So, in dreams, the first and most obvious meaning of a volcano is an eruption of emotions. And volcano dreams can appear when you're angry, but not always. They can also appear when you're anxious or stressed and can indicate a feeling of mounting tension. If you feel like the dream is full of fear and anxiety, this might be a reflection of feelings that you're having in life and issues that are causing anxiety. So, this could be a reason to read a book which is about a volcano as a way of tackling these difficult emotions. So, we will be coming to some of those volcanic novels and short stories a little bit later in the session. But first, I just want to talk a little bit more about volcanoes in dreams. Do any of you have volcanic dreams? I bet you do. And do they represent stress, anxiety, anger, or are they more about sex? I'd love to know any of your thoughts. Damien Barr, you're talking about the violins of Thingy, who wrote that Caribbean volcano novel. Damien, oh, the violins of Montserrat. That's ringing total bells, but I'm not actually recalling it at this moment. So you're going to have to tell me about that when we next meet, because it's one I should clearly know. And there are some great volcanoes in Caribbean literature. And clearly, that's one that I need to investigate. I've even climbed a volcano in the Caribbean many years ago, which was very exciting. Luckily, it wasn't live. So, volcanoes are in dreams and possibly in literature as well, a channel for things deep inside to come to the surface, which might be reflecting what's going on in your own life. But also in dreams and in literature, those feelings coming to the surface are perhaps a symbol of the lava coming up to the surface of the earth and purging all those bad things out of your life. So volcanoes can actually represent creativity and positivity as well as more negative emotions. Tammy's saying that she only has drowning dreams. I wonder if you're talking about only drowning dreams or only drowning volcanic dreams. Tammy, if you can clarify that, I'd love to know more. Um, Although there's always a danger that we might start going into great depth analysing each other's dreams, which is fun, but not necessarily so much about literature. Nonetheless, I would love to know. So, volcano dreams and volcano stories can express extreme emotions and also be a very powerful symbol of potential transformation. And I think a lot of the volcano books that I'm going to be mentioning this evening are an expression of transformation in the people's lives that they're mentioned in the novels. Um, Tammy's saying drowning dreams with no volcanoes in the sea, but maybe the same issues. That's interesting and slightly alarming, Tammy. We need to have a drink and talk about this. Um, so, yes, volcanoes in dreams and in literature can be an expression of intense emotion, anger, uh, but also the prelude to creativity because the volcano is often burning off a deep and tragic emotion, paving the way for something more creative and positive. But before we move on to uh, the exciting novels and short stories that I'm going to be mentioning, I did also want to talk a little bit about volcanoes in mythology because back in ancient times, volcanoes were, of course, explained by imagining that they were gods and goddesses having fights with each other or exploding with rage independently. So, volcano gods include Vulcan, who in ancient Roman religion and myth was the god of fire. And he was also a god who forged metals, like Hephaestus, who was the Greek equivalent, who was Hephaestus the blacksmith, but he was also the god of the fire. Vulcan was the god of deserts and volcanoes as well as metalworking and the forge. And he's often depicted with a blacksmith's hammer, as was Hephaestus as well. Shango is a god of fire from Africa, who's also the god of lightning and thunder, and he is depicted holding a double headed axe. So these fiery volcanic gods were remarkably uh, prone to carrying extreme weapons, which they did tend to use for the good rather than the bad. So, although Vulcan and Hephaestus were both quite warlike gods who did love to use fire, they were also very artistic and created wonderful works of art and beautiful metalwork. So, they were definitely using both elements of fire for the good and the bad, for the destructive and the creative, like so many volcanic stories, which we're going to be talking about. And other mythology is based around many of the places in the world where there are volcanoes, such as the Fijian island Ono, has a legend about Tanovo, the chief of this Fijian island, who was very partial to a late afternoon stroll. Each day he would walk along the beach, watch the sun go down, and contemplate the paradise that he lived in. But one day, Tanovo's rival, chief of the volcano Nabukalevo, pushed his mountain up and blocked Tanovo's view of the sunset. Enraged, understandably, at this, And robbed of the pacifying effects of his daily meditation, Tanovo wove giant coconut fiber baskets and began to remove earth from the mountain. His rival caught Tanovo and chased him away, and Tanovo, in his flight, dropped earth at the islands of Dravuni and Galoa. And this is a myth which actually explains the geological changes that really happened on this Fijian island. And this is what's so fascinating about some of these volcano stories and myths, is that they're not just myths and stories, they're actually explaining genuine geological incidents that really did happen. And there was a geologist called Patrick Nunn, who is still working to this day, who, when he first heard this myth, realized that it did explain the real volcanic eruption of Nabukalevo, which did have serious effects on the islands of Fiji. And he discovered through his investigations, which related to the myth, that the volcano hadn't erupted for 50,000 years ago, long before the island was first inhabited, around 2000 BC. And he at first thought that the myth was referring to events that happened 50,000 years ago. But then when he paid a bit more attention to the local myths, which were the oral myths and the written myths too, he realized that actually they were referring to events that happened actually more recently, only 3,000 years ago. So not 50,000 years ago as they'd first thought. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is because these myths, which are still told in the oral tradition now, are referring to what seem like ancient events that happened thousands of years ago, but they do explain genuine geological events which may have happened within human memory. And that's the joy of stories. Stories, not only the written ones, but also the oral ones, can explain what's really happening to our world. And geologists have started increasingly to listen to the oral myths, to analyze the Haitian songs that have been now written down, and to analyze them in more depth to find out what was really happening within these myths, and to attach the myths to the real geological events. And through analyzing the Haitian myths, which were written down, the geologists managed to piece together a lot of geological understanding, which they didn't have a clue about before. They began to understand earthquakes, movements of tectonic plates, and the shifting forests, and even the shifting of the mountains. And this geologist, Swanson, was very grateful for the idea that he did indeed listen to these Haitian songs and find out far more about the real events from hundreds or thousands of years ago as a result of listening to the oral stories. So it's important to remember that stories are not always written down. We have to listen to the ones that are passed down by word of mouth as well. And we should be reaching out as much as possible to the indigenous people in places like Haiti, Tahiti, Australia, and find out more about ancient times through those oral stories that have been handed down over hundreds of years. And one of these geologists made the really interesting comment that stories can set with time, just like rock. So these myths from Fiji, which told the stories of the angry god whose view was blocked of his sunset by a mountain, their story was set in stone, just like a mountain, just like lava sets. And that story then became a key to understanding of the history of Fiji, which is a pretty fabulous thought. So, Ollie, it's great to see you here this evening. Harper, lovely to have you joining me. I'm going to leap in to the world of volcano literature with the fantastic and quite difficult read Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, which is a book which is not an easy one to sit down and read over an evening or two. It takes a bit of work to get into. Malcolm Lowry himself spent 6 years writing it, and he was very much a volcanic character, which is why he wrote this book, Under the Volcano, which is set in Mexico in a town which was actually nestling between two volcanoes, one of which was extinct and one of which was still alive. And it tells the story of a British consul, a diplomat, who is dying of alcoholism. And I've just seen that Tiffany is here. And before I leap in to Under the Volcano, I'm going to mention that it's Tiffany Murray's fantastic story, Lava, 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 which got me going down this route in the first place. Tiffany, thanks so much. I loved that short story, which, by the way, everyone, is available on Radio 4 to listen to for only 5 more days, I discovered today. So you must go and listen to it. It's only 15 minutes long. It's a great story. And it also has really lovely sound effects on it with kind of bubbly lava like noises. And the character in the story talks about listening to a volcano. Have you ever listened to a volcano? Can one listen to a volcano? I think you're very lucky if you can. But in this short story called Lava, 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 you can listen to the volcano, and that's a really wonderful thing. And when I heard that Tiffany had written a short story about a volcano, it got me thinking about all the great volcanoes in literature and how we should think more about them and what they mean and represent. So, Tiffany, thanks so much for that nudge. And the story that she wrote is all about a girl's relationship with her mother, and her mother is obsessed with volcanoes. I won't tell you any more, but it's a really great listen. And I wonder if it's available in written form anywhere, Tiffany, let us know. So moving back to Malcolm Lowry, this is probably one of the most famous novels that has volcano in the title. It is a seminal work which used to be on the university English curriculum, but apparently has slightly been dropped because it is notoriously a difficult read. It was published in 1947, and it concerns the final day of British consul Geoffrey Firmin, an alcoholic diplomat whose friends try to stop him from drinking himself to death in Mexico. That's a summary of the book in a nutshell. Under the Volcano is ranked 11th on the Modern Library's list of the best English language novels of the 20th century. So I don't want to put you off by saying that it's a difficult read. It's it's a read that is immersive, and you have to dive in and allow yourself to be sucked into its strange dipsomaniac embrace. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it to give you a glimpse of what it's like. I find it's a book that you can pick up and read any page and really sink into it and enjoy. And you don't necessarily have to know what's going on. All you really need to know is that it's the story of this consul's last day. We know that he's going to die at the end of the day, but there's a huge amount of wisdom, interest, and sadness packed into that one day. And there are, of course, flashbacks too. Here's a little glimpse. Behind them walked the only living thing that shared their pilgrimage, the dog, and by degrees they reached the briny sea. Then, with souls well disciplined, they reached the northern region and beheld, with heaven aspiring hearts, the mighty mountain Himavat. Whereupon the lake was lapping, the lilacs were blowing, the chenas were budding, the mountains were glistening, the waterfalls were playing, the spring was green, the snow was white, the sky was blue, the fruit blossoms were clouds, and he was still thirsty. Then the snow was not glistening, the fruit blossoms were not clouds, they were mosquitoes, the Himalayas were hidden by dust, and he was thirstier than ever. Then the lake was blowing, the snow was blowing, the waterfalls were blowing, the fruit blossoms were blowing, the seasons were blowing, blowing away. He was blowing away himself, whirled by a storm of blossoms into the mountains, where now the rain was falling. But this rain, that fell only on the mountains, did not assuage his thirst. Nor was he after all in the mountains. He was standing among cattle in a stream. He was resting, with some ponies knee-deep beside him in the cool marshes. He was lying face downward, drinking from a lake that reflected the white-capped ranges, the clouds piled 5 miles high behind the mighty mountain Hamavat, the purple chenars and a village nestling among the mulberries. Yet his thirst still remained unquenched, perhaps because he was drinking, not water, but lightness and promise of lightness. How could he be drinking promise of lightness? Perhaps because he was drinking, not water, but certainty of brightness. How could he be drinking certainty of brightness? Certainty of brightness, promise of lightness, of light, 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 and again of light, 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 light. The console, an inconceivable anguish of horripilating, hungover thunderclapping about his skull, and accompanied by a protective screen of demons nattering in his ears, became aware that in the horrid event of his being observed by his neighbours, it could hardly be supposed he was just sauntering down his garden with some innocent horticultural subject in view, nor even that he was sauntering. I won't go on, but that glimpse, I think, is a great glimpse into the general atmosphere of the book Under the Volcano, which is all about a man completely addicted to alcohol, spending his entire day thinking about his next drink, thinking about putting off his next drink, but then finally giving in to his next drink. And so it goes on. There are also moments where he's thinking about his wife, talking to his wife. He's cuckolded. He has terrible flashbacks and flash forwards. It's all quite a harrowing book, it has to be said. And all the while, the two volcanoes are looming over the town. And it's the Mexican Day of the Dead. Forgot to mention that, which is pretty important, which gives the atmosphere of the book as being all about death, all about ghosts, and all about the people surrounding them who are no longer with us. And we have lots of foreshadowings of what's going to happen to the consul at the end of the day. And we feel a sense of the volcanoes representing the creativity of his life, which hasn't happened, the simmering lava of his impotent rage, and also the cracks in his facade, which are represented by the fissures in the mountain. It is a beautiful book. It's beautifully written, and it is a great read. But it's one to save for when you're possibly feeling quite strong and have a bit of time. Lowry's own personal life did echo that of his writing. He actually lost, mislaid, and burnt many of his works. He lived in a highly irregular and chaotic fashion. He lived on beach huts in the middle of nowhere with his wife, trying to write his books and keep them with him. But numerous times his books actually got accidentally burnt or maybe deliberately burnt, and he had to rewrite them. Such was the chaos of his existence. But he was also, as I said earlier, a volcanic kind of man. So his art did very much reflect his life. He died in mysterious circumstances, aged 57, in Ripe, Sussex, intriguingly, not too far from here. I would now love to leap to A Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Jules Verne, which is also mentioned, I'd like to point out, in Tiffany's lovely story, because it is one of the books that is also seminal about volcanoes. Some of you might have read it as children, possibly. It's a really great story, and it has two active volcanoes in the book. It describes Professor Liedenbrock and his nephew Axel, who enter the Earth via a crater in the Icelandic volcano Snæfellsjökull, and after many adventures, including encounters with prehistoric creatures, they exit again when they're blown out of a vent in the Italian volcano Stromboli. I love the fact that Jules Verne likes to send people on these mad adventures on one continent and then they come out in a completely different one. He also does the same in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where they make this completely crazy adventure under the water round the earth. But he does tell a gripping, great yarn, and he's a great storyteller. And the volcanoes in Journey to the Centre of the Earth are great characters in themselves. When researching for this topic, volcanoes in literature, I discovered that there's actually a subcategory of fiction called subterranean fiction, which I hadn't heard about as a term previously. And I'm definitely going to be led on to doing a session on subterranean fiction, because isn't that just a fantastic idea in itself? It's a category that existed well before Jules Verne. But Jules Verne's novel was very well researched and was full of the science of its day, that's Victorian science. And it was very inventive and made a great contribution to the science fiction subgenre of time travel. And Jules Verne's innovation was the concept of a prehistoric realm still existing in the present day world. This was also an idea that inspired other authors, such as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote The Lost World, in which there are also prehistoric creatures roaming the earth, and Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote a series of books called Pellucidar, which also took place largely under the earth. And in his version of stories, there was a huge realm under the earth where again there were dinosaurs roaming. And his character Tarzan made a special appearance in the Pellucidar novels as well. So subterranean fiction is a really interesting subgenre of adventure fiction, which has quite a large dose of science fiction or fantasy, and a lot of it takes place well below the center of the earth. And it quite often involves a bit of volcanic action as well. John Wyndham wrote one of the subterranean novels too, The Secret People, which features prisoners held captive in a labyrinth of caves by an ancient race of pygmies dwelling beneath the Sahara Desert. And they have to enter that also through the crater of a volcano. So it's all happening in the world of volcanic literature. The novel Indiana Jones and the Hollow Earth by Max McCoy also expands on the legend of an advanced civilization in the Earth's interior. Excuse me. In a discussion about volcanic literature, we must mention The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, which also features an excellent volcanic moment. The destination of Frodo and Sam in Tolkien's classic is naturally Mount Doom, the belching volcano in Mordor, where the ring was originally forged. Near its summit, as the lava glows from the cracks of doom, the story has its climax. The defeat of Sauron triggers a massive eruption. So that's another great volcano in literature. Volcanoes often also are accompanied by dragons, particularly when you get into the realms of fantasy. But I'm now going to mention a couple more literary novels, not so fantastical. Victory by Joseph Conrad is an amazing novel, another quite long one, and nowadays might seem not the easiest read, which describes the reclusive misanthropic Axel Heist who goes to live on a remote island, and his only neighbour is a semi dormant volcano which faintly smokes all day. And this becomes Axel's friend in a way. It becomes his only person that he talks to. And at night, the volcano levels at him a dull red glow from among the clear stars, expanding and collapsing spasmodically. And the volcano in that book very much presages a violent end. But I would highly recommend it as an excellent read too, somewhat full of simmering doom, like many of these volcano books, you might say. There's a great short story by Jean Rhys, who wrote Wide Sargasso Sea, which I'm sure many of you will have read or heard of. So Jean Rhys was born in Dominica in 1890. So those Caribbean uh, volcanoes were definitely lurking in her blood. She was the daughter of a Welsh doctor and a white Creole mother. She came to England when she was 16 and drifted into a series of jobs, including chorus girl, mannequin, artist model, after her father died. She was also very striking looking. There are lots of great pictures of her online, looking incredibly fashionable and cool. She began to write when the first of her three marriages broke up, and she wrote a lot of really excellent short stories, as well as her novels that she's more famous for. And I'm going to read to you this short story because it's so short that it will only take about 5 minutes. And it is about a volcano. It's called Heat. And I'm going to read you it in its entirety. So sit down, grab a drink, possibly a candle, and get into that volcanic vibe. Ash had fallen. Perhaps it had fallen the night before, or perhaps it was still falling. I can only remember in patches. I was looking at it 2 feet deep on the flat roof outside my bedroom. The ash and the silence. Nobody talked in the street. Nobody talked while we ate, or hardly at all. I know now that they were all frightened. They thought our volcano was going up. Our volcano was called the Boiling Lake. That's what it was, a sheet of water that always boiled. From what fires? I thought of it as a mysterious place that few people had ever seen. In the churchyard, where we often went, for death was not then a taboo subject, quite near the grave of my little sister, was a large marble headstone, sacred to the memory of Clive, who lost his life at the Boiling Lake in Dominica in a heroic attempt to save his guide. Aged 27, I remember that too. He was a young Englishman, a visitor, who'd gone exploring with 2 guides to the Boiling Lake. As they were standing looking at it, one of the guides, who was a long way ahead, staggered and fell. The other seized hold of the Englishman's hand and said, "Run!" There must have been some local tradition that poisonous gases sometimes came out of the lake. After a few steps, the Englishman pulled his hand away and went back and lifted up the man who had fallen. Then he too staggered and they both fell. The surviving guide ran and told what had happened. In the afternoon, 2 little friends were coming to see us, and to my surprise, they both arrived carrying large glass bottles. Both the bottles had carefully written labels pasted on. Ash collected from the streets of Roseau on May the 8th, 1902. The little boy asked me if I'd like to have his jar, but I refused. I didn't want to touch the ash. I don't remember the rest of the day. I must have gone to bed, for that night my mother woke me and, without saying anything, led me to the window. There was a huge black cloud over Martinique. I couldn't ever describe that cloud, so huge and black it was, but I have never forgotten it. There was no moon, no stars, but the edges of the cloud were flame-coloured. My mother said, "You will never see anything like this in your life again." That was all. I must have gone to sleep at the window and been carried to bed. Next morning we heard what had happened. Was it a blue or a grey day? I only know ash wasn't falling any longer. The Roseau fishermen went out very early, as they did in those days. They met the fishermen from Port de France who knew. That was how we heard before the cablegrams. The papers and all the rest came flooding in. That was how we heard of Montpellier's eruption and the deaths of 40,000 people, and that there was nothing left of Saint-Pierre. As soon as ships were sailing again between Dominica and Martinique, my father went to see the desolation that was left. He brought back a pair of candlesticks, tall, heavy brass candlesticks, which must have been in a church. The heat had twisted them into an extraordinary shape. He hung them on the wall of the dining room, and I stared at them all through meals, trying to make sense of the shape. It was after this that the gossip started. That went on for years, so I can remember it well. Saint-Pierre, they said, was a very wicked city. It had not only a theatre, but an opera house, which was probably wickeder still. Companies from Paris performed there. But worse than this was the behaviour of the women, who were the prettiest in the West Indies. They tied their turbans in a particular way, a sort of language of love that all Saint-Pierre people understood. Tied in one way, it meant, "I am in love. I am not free." Tied another way, it meant, "You are welcome. I am free." Even the women who were married, or as good as, tied their kerchiefs in the "I am free" way. And that wasn't all. The last bishop who'd visited the city had taken off his shoes and solemnly shaken them over it. After that, of course, you wouldn't wonder. As I grew older, I heard of a book by a man called Lafcadio Hearn, who'd written about Saint-Pierre as it used to be, about T. Marie and all the others, but I never found the book and stopped looking for it. However, one day I did discover a pile of old newspapers and magazines, some illustrated, the English version of the eruption. They said nothing about the opera house or the theatre, which must have seemed to the English the height of frivolity in a Caribbean island, and very little about the city and its inhabitants. It was nearly all around the one man who had survived. He was a convict imprisoned in an underground cell, so he escaped, the only one out of 40,000. He was now travelling around the music halls of the world being exhibited. They'd taught him a little speech. He must be quite a rich man. What did he do with his money? Would he marry again? His wife and children had been killed in the eruption. I read all this. Then I thought, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. It's a rather chilling story, but rather brilliant, and based on a true story and a true eruption, which does make you think you definitely do not want to live anywhere near a volcano. Just don't do it. There's too many hideous stories from volcanoes, which I've been reading about for this session. So Jean Rhys, she is a brilliant writer and possibly a bit neglected. And I would urge you all to find her short stories and get hold of them and have a read, because they are glimpses into another era, not so long ago. Some other great volcano books which I would love to bring to your attention. I don't know if you remember the Willard Price adventure books, which were a major feature of my childhood, but that does take us back a little bit. So Willard Price wrote 14 adventure books between 1956 and 1980, and they all had fantastic titles such as Amazon Adventure, Cannibal Adventure, Tiger Adventure, Arctic Adventure, and verily, Volcano Adventure. And Volcano Adventure is a great story. It was chosen by Bear Grylls as one of his favourite and formative stories uh, because they have fantastic characters. There's two brothers, Hal and Roger Hunt, who are, I think, at the beginning of the book about 18 and 14, and the beginning of the series of 14. And they are allowed to have a year off school, both of them, slightly unlikely, but hey, suspending disbelief. And they go on this great series of adventures around the world, variously saving animals in various different ways. And Volcano Adventure is a bit of a departure from his usual format because he doesn't actually save any animals in this book. The brothers don't. They instead are hired to work alongside a scientist and investigate volcanoes. So they've been working with a scientist to help save animals generally. And they get involved with all sorts of fantastic adventures with elephants, manta rays, sharks, tigers, and cannibals. It's all very good fun. And Hal and Roger Hunt, in Bear Grylls' words, have a fantastic never say die attitude, and they show great problem solving skills as they save lives of people from deadly volcanic disasters. They actually go into at least 3 or 4 volcanoes during the course of this short novel, and some more modern readers have slightly complained about it all being a tad unfeasible. But, you know, do we really care? They're written for teenagers, probably age about 10 to 14. They're brilliant reads. That's the age that I read them myself. And they're very, very adventurous. And the volcano one is really fun. And it also gives you lots of really great volcano facts, which is all to the good. Rather brilliantly, Anthony McGowan has also written 4 follow-ups to the Willard Price adventure novels, because a lot of people like me had that great nostalgia for those wonderful novels from our youth. And Anthony McGowan has since written um, various follow-ups. I'm just trying to find the titles. They're called Leopard Adventure, Bear Adventure, Shark Adventure, and Python Adventure. And he takes the children of Hal and Roger Hunt, and they go on adventures themselves. One's a girl called Amazon. How cool is that? Obviously, harking back to one of their first adventures. And I haven't read these yet, but they sound brilliant. I love Anthony McGowan's writing, and I think it's a fantastic idea to go back and revisit uh, those brothers, but taking them to the next generation. So check those out, or check those out for any young people in your lives who might be in need of a great adventure. But also check out Volcano Adventure, because that is really exciting and brilliant and volcanic. So I've got a couple more to mention, but before I do that, I'm just going to do a little experiment which needs me to turn on the light. So bear with me 1 second while I just give us a little bit of light. Don't go anywhere. We might be able to see a bit better. So earlier today, while preparing for this exciting session, I was looking up how to make your own volcano, and I have attempted to make a solution. This might not work, but it did when I did it earlier today with my daughter, Harper. Thanks, Harper, for your excellent assistance. So I've got a mixture of bicarbonate of soda, washing up liquid, and water, and then I'm going to add vinegar and food colouring, and it might erupt, and obviously it's going to be a terrible letdown if it doesn't, but let's see what happens. Yes, here it comes. Will it go over the top? I think it will. It's coming up. Ooh, it's hesitating. It's not quite such an extreme eruption as we had earlier today, but actually it's looking quite good. I wouldn't totally call it volcanic. It's maybe a little bit of a limp kind of volcano, but actually I'm pleased. I'm pleased that it's done something. It's also not as red as I'd like it to be. I think that's because the fairy liquid is green and it's slightly cancelling out that exciting redness. But anyway, there's my mini volcano for you. I'm sure that some of you have done other great volcano experiments in your lives, which I'd love to see if you are able to send me any pictures. That's for the volcano obsessives out there who I'm sure spend all of your time making volcanoes at home. Thanks, Tammy, for your vote of confidence. I'm going to keep practicing to get a bigger, better volcano. Now, I'm going to read you another lovely poem by D.H. Lawrence, which is about a volcano. It's called Peace. And this is also one that I didn't know until I started researching volcanoes in literature. Peace by D.H. Lawrence. Peace is written on the doorstep in lava. Peace, black peace congealed. My heart will know no peace till the hill bursts. Brilliant, intolerable lava, brilliant as a powerful burning glass, walking like a royal snake down the mountain towards the sea. Forests, cities, bridges, gone again in the bright trail of lava. Naxos thousands of feet below the olive roots, and now the olive leaves thousands of feet below the lava fire. Peace congealed in black lava on the doorstep. Within, white-hot lava, never at peace, till it burst forth blinding, withering the earth, to set again into rock, grey-black rock. Call it peace? That's a really interesting poem. That would take a lot of pondering, I think, to understand all of the many depths within it. I do love the verse, peace, black peace congealed, my heart will know no peace till the hill bursts. So it's like he's waiting for that volcano to explode. He can't have any peace until the hill has erupted, which I'm presuming is a hill of something intolerable, some kind of intolerable emotion in his life, because he says, brilliant, intolerable lava, brilliant as a powerful burning glass, walking like a royal snake down the mountain towards the sea. Walking like a royal snake. Does lava walk like a royal snake? I wouldn't really say lava walks or that a snake walks, but it does create an amazing image of a snake walking, a royal snake walking down a hill towards the sea. Forests, cities, bridges, gone again in the bright trail of lava. Naxos, thousands of feet below the olive roots, and now the olive leaves, thousands of feet below the lava fire. It's all full of history and great deep passions, which are opaque. It's one of those poems which I think one needs to read many times to get the full meaning and understanding. But I do love it the more I read it. Peace congealed in black lava on the doorstep. Within, white-hot lava, never at peace, till it burst forth blinding, withering the earth, to set again into rock. So it's as if the emotions all have to burst out in order to create peace. So there's a massive burst of fire, lava, eruption, molten rock, and then it all settles and congeals. But does that become peace? We ask ourselves. So one of the people that I asked on Twitter about volcanoes in literature mentioned Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which is a book I've always been too scared to read, I have to admit. I wonder if any of you watching tonight have read it. It is quite a deeply violent and bloody book. And the Twitter commenter said that one of the characters does something very interesting with volcanic ash in the book. And he didn't want to reveal what it was because he said that would be too much of a giveaway, which now makes me totally want to read the book. And I'm going to have to read it, even though I am scared of reading it, because I know that it involves scalpings, which is something I don't necessarily want to read about. But for people who don't know it, Blood Meridian, it's a novel that tells the story of a teenage runaway named only as the Kid, because Cormac McCarthy loves to not name his characters, who was born in Tennessee during the famously active Leonid's meteor shower of 1833. He first meets the enormous, pale, hairless Judge Holden at a religious festival in a tent in Texas, at which Holden falsely accuses the preacher of raping children and goats, inciting the audience to attack him. So that's the beginning of the story. And then we have terrifying and awful gang warfare and attacks on Comanche warriors. And many people are killed, many people are scalped. There's lots of sitting around in deserts, plotting violence. And all in all, it's quite a horrifying but amazing and brilliant novel, reputedly, which I can't say from personal experience, but I did love The Road by Cormac McCarthy, having put off reading it for many a month because it was all equally dystopian and depressing. But in Blood Meridian, there is an extinct volcano, and that's what makes the book relevant to this evening's discussion. And I believe that some of the characters sit around this extinct volcano and they get involved with the ash around the bottom of it. So we won't talk any more about that because that's a bit of an exciting diversion. And we're coming to the end of the evening anyway. But I wonder if there's any major volcanoes of literature that I've missed out. I'd love to know if you think there's others that I should have talked about. There's the one that Damien was mentioning earlier, set in the Caribbean, which I now really want to find out about. And I'd just like to mention that I did spend quite a few days when I lived in Trinidad going to visit the Pitch Lake, which was not a volcano, it was a lake, but it did have bubbling lava coming up out of it. So it's like a mini volcano. And that's probably the closest I've really got to a proper volcano, although I have visited the volcano on Lanzarote, which was very exciting, and have seen the steam coming up out of that. So have you been to any volcanoes? I bet Tiffany has, without a doubt. And I'd love to hear your stories if anyone wants to send me a message on Facebook, Instagram, or on Twitter. Please do. Next week, I'm actually going to be having a break from the sessions. It's all getting slightly hectic coming up with the summer holidays. But then the week after that, which is, I think, the 14th of July, I'm going to be doing a special bibliotherapy session on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook page, all about happiness in literature, which I'm really looking forward to doing. And then the week after that, I believe, I'm slightly losing track now, I think it might be the 21st of June, I'm going to be interviewing Mel Gedroic about her new novel on Instagram Live. So do join me for that, 21st of June, and generally watch this space. So I won't be doing one next week, sad to say, but the week after that, 14th, I'll be on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook page. So do join me there. And thanks so much for joining me this evening. And see you soon. Have a good evening. Good night.